Good morning, MUFON. How's it going, everybody? Did you get a good night's sleep? Ready for a big day of wonderful lectures, I hope? Some good breakfast in your belly? Woohoo! Let's do this. Welcome back to those of you who were here yesterday, and to all of you watching at home, of course, and from around the world. Thank you for joining us. I'm Katie Cook, and like I said, we have a packed day ahead. And we should have around 10 to 15 minutes between speakers as usual if you need a quick break. We will have that walk-away lunch again around 11:45 and be back here a little after 1. And like I've been saying all weekend, just please be mindful of the doors. If you have to leave and come back, that's no big deal. Just kind of make sure they're not slamming behind you. And if you haven't already turned off your cell phones, if you could put those on silent, that would be really, really appreciated. Also, the speaker panel, if you have tickets to the private speaker panel, there was one yesterday. It was in a different building. Today, they're actually going to do that here, right here in this room. So that's going to happen around noon. That'll be after Colonel Halt, and we'll probably have everyone clear the room, rearrange things a little bit, and then have you back in. And good news, tickets are still available to that. I think they're $50. And speaking of tickets, raffle tickets are still available. The winner is going to be called today around 2:30. If you win, you will get a free symposium ticket to next year's MUFON Symposium in Denver. So you definitely want to get a raffle ticket. Let's see what else. I know we're all a little nervous today. There's a big hurricane headed to the southeast, and I know that's on all of our minds. Let's just maybe take a moment to send them a lot of love and prayers that not too much harm is done. I know that's just kind of sitting in the back of all of our minds. But with all of that said, it is time now for our first speakers. We have two coming up here together. We are kicking this one off with a real bang. Our first speaker, he entered the U.S. Air Force in 1979 and would go on to serve 27 years in active and reserve status with various assignments at various bases around the world during his career. But perhaps his most notable was while he was assigned as a security police law enforcement patrolman at Royal Air Base RAF Bentwaters in England during the peak of the Cold War. And in December of 1980, he became one of the primary witnesses to the now famous Rendlesham Forest incident, an event that would obviously forever change his life. He's co-authored 2 books, 2014's Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, and in 2020, Weaponization of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, the Rendlesham Forest Incident 40 years later. Please welcome John Borroughs to the stage. And joining... Did my mic go away? There it is. And joining John is a man who has served as public defendant and later opened his own law practice concentrating on federal civil litigation as a consumer rights attorney. After meeting John at a UFO conference I think he actually put that conference together in 2011, John asked him for help in getting the government to recognize he'd been injured in the Rendlesham Forest incident. And 4 years later, they would indeed be successful in awarding John full disability, and in doing so have the U.S. government admit by de facto, for the first time ever, that a UFO was the proximate cause of injury to a human. He was also part of the 2013 citizen hearing on disclosure held at the National Press Club in D.C. and contributed to the 2 books that John authored. Please welcome Patrick Frascanga.
Thank you very much for the introductions, Katie, appreciate that. And glad to be here, and glad to see everyone here today. The first thing I've got to say before beginning is please have in your thoughts today and tomorrow, your prayers, if that's your spiritual go-to thing, for our fellow countrymen down in Louisiana, in my home state of Mississippi, with Hurricane Ida coming ashore. So, all right, the Rendlesham Forest incident. Is there anyone here that really doesn't know much about that? Kind of a first. Okay. Well, I didn't either. It wasn't until about 2008 I just happened to be watching a television program called UFO Hunters. And I'd always had an interest in UFOs, but I never really had a thought as to whether, they were real, either alien or just what they were. And so I was entertained by that show, which most of those cable shows, that's what they're there for anyways, just to entertain. So one night they had one called, I think it was Military versus UFOs. And if anybody saw that, that was in '08. It's the first airing of that program. It was about John, Colonel Halt, Jim Penniston, and the Rendlesham Forest incident. And it captivated me. I thought, wait a minute, I've more or less been on the skeptic side of this topic until I saw that show. And I thought, this sounds like the real deal, okay? Roswell was interesting to me and so many others. Kenneth Arnold's sighting before that, but this one seemed to have everything. It had all the military witnesses, just all the trappings of what, seemed to be a real event. So I thought about that, ruminated over that for probably the next 2 or 3 years, and finally I decided, I want to meet these people. I want to get the TV screen out from in between us. I want to see them in person and decide for myself. So what I did, I think I'm now behind, and here we go. We've been through. What we did was we formed a conference, a UFO conference. And it was through that conference that I not only got to meet these gentlemen, like Colonel Halt, who's here with us today, and John Borroughs, but it began a journey that I had no idea was going to be far more than just a personal sense of trying to find out if I believe something really happened. So today we will discuss the following: an overview of the encounter, what happened, especially for those of you who don't know, the struggle to get information from the government. Again, when this all began, I had no idea this is where we would go. John's medical records have become key to that. The Department of Veterans Affairs and their admission by de facto, ultimately, and boy, this is not anything I thought I was signing up for. Years later, that John was actually injured by an unidentified aerial vehicle. Following that, John's going to give a summary of the work that he's done since that time. Now, Nick Pope, of course, everybody knows Nick. I've had the pleasure of knowing Nick for years. I don't know if he's in the audience right now, but I've got to say, the quote that he gave quite some time ago about "I've gone on record saying Rendlesham might be the turning point in history that leads to the explanation of the UFO phenomenon." When I see him, I'm going to ask if he could put ranch in there somewhere. Perhaps I've got on record saying "while on my ranch." Okay, I think it would add a little to it. I was fortunate to get to know Nick in cooperating with the book Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, which has now been out for about 7 years. I was not a co-author, but I wrote a chapter in the book. It was a pleasure to get to know Nick through that. The Royal Air Force Bentwaters Base was home to the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing for the United States Air Force during the Cold War. And as such, it was important, if not critical, in protecting Europe from being overrun by any kind of Soviet forces during the Cold War. It was at that base that John was working as a law enforcement officer at the time for the base, along with Jim Penniston and others. And it was on Boxing Day of December 26, 1980, that strange lights were appearing in the forest that evening. During that evening, and they were off base, of course, and it was during that there would be a response from the base personnel, and of course, John being one of the first responders to the lights that were in the forest. This would go on for another couple of nights, and John would be a part of 2 of those nights. Of course, Colonel Halt was a part of that as well. In the forest, when John first encountered the lights, he and Jim Penniston, who had gone into the forest off base, would discover a craft approximately, let's go right on that, from the east gate. This is where they left from. I've gotten off from these slides here, pardon me. They would go out into the forest from the east gate, and they would eventually come across a craft that was either hovering or it was sitting on the forest floor. That was almost 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet, triangular configuration. Let me see if I can go ahead and get us to that. British police responded, and ultimately this would be the configuration of where the craft had been. The craft would eventually rise up silently, and then, as Jim Penniston would say, disappear, I believe, was at impossible speeds. Okay. That in a nutshell is the Rendlesham Forest case. There's a whole lot more, of course. Now, critics were saying, oh, what you saw was just light through the forest from the Orford Nest Lighthouse. Well, I think the Orford Nest Lighthouse has since been decommissioned and is no longer operating, and therefore many folks say, well, then you should never see another UFO in the forest. If you go back and read about and watch any documentaries that cover this, and particularly if you talk to the principals involved, you understand just how ridiculous it is to think that these men misunderstood what they took a light from a lighthouse and thought it was a craft moving through the forest. Ridiculous. After the incident, and I'm not going to read all these quotes, just to give you an idea, there were a number of high officials in Europe with the Air Force, such as General Gabriel, that came forth and made comments about what had happened, not excusing it as being swamp gas, of course, or anything ridiculous, but that something had happened. Major General Gordon Williams was one of those people, and I'm going to talk a little bit about him in a little while because I got to meet him personally and really enjoyed the time I spent with him. So there were a number of high officials that were saying things about what was out there, but nobody was really explaining it, including Colonel Halt here, which I'm going to let him do that. Okay. I've already mentioned that I wanted to get to meet the principals of this incident. So I organized a conference in 2011, a UFO conference, and I invited John, Jim, Linda Moulton Howe, and Tom Carey from the Roswell incident, who's done a lot of writing about that. And we called it From Roswell to Rendlesham, and we had them there in my hometown, Mississippi, for about 2 days. And it was a wonderful event, and we had a pretty good crowd too, I would say. But the main thing was I wanted to meet these folks, and I did, and I got to know them. It was after the conference that John asked me if I could help him do something he had been trying to do on his own. And that was to get his medical records, because John's health had started to decline. And he needed medical records from the time he was in the Air Force for his civilian doctors to render the proper care. So, first thing we did was we began issuing FOIA requests to all the agencies you see on here. And this was a fascinating process. It also proved to be completely futile. After about a year of issuing, I think it was 2 rounds of letters. This is an example of one here to AFOSI. And we get a typical response like we're getting here that, this is the letter to AFOSI in which I was asking for, whether John Borroughs was mentioned in relation to lights, plasma fields, vehicles, what have you. And the common response would be either no, we don't have them in our records, we don't know anything about it. I could have asked these people if they have record of any paperclip purchases by their office in the last 50 years, and they would have said, we don't know. I could have asked if they have staplers in their office. Well, we're not sure. So that was just kind of the whole attitude. So it quickly became a situation, kind of like a saga of the absurd, yeah, we can keep doing this, but you know what? And I told John, they got us. There's nothing we can do to make them do what they should do if they don't want to do it or never intend to do it. Okay? But that's okay. That's okay, because we weren't finished. But what we did do is let them know we were there. Another letter that we got in response was from the U.S. State Department, which kind of came the closest in saying essentially that some or all of your records you have requested do not appear to be State Department records. And then the second page of that letter, they talk about some of those that you seek may have originated by another agency. And actually, that was pretty good. They were kind of saying, this is the State Department, they were kind of saying, there may be some records. In fact, we just don't have them. John contacted Senator John Kyle, who was one of Arizona's senators at the time, about the same time that we're doing the FOIA request out of my office in Mississippi, trying to get help again. And let me go back to that slide. That was all right. We were then, about that same time, invited to appear in Washington at the National Press Club for the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure. I don't know if anyone was there in the room today, but it was a wonderful event, very well done. And it would it would be myself, John, Jim, and of course Nick Pope appeared. We were on for most of one day, and I presented testimony about the lack of concern. The FOIA requests were going nowhere. John is literally dying, in a sense. He doesn't have many years, if even that, left if he doesn't get the proper medical intervention that he needed, which no civilian doctor really knew because of the nature, we're going to come back to that, of his injuries. Okay. Because I had worked for a congressman from California and Washington, I knew how to draft things like this. There were 6 former members of Congress on this mock congressional hearing panel that we appeared at the National Press Club. So I wrote this letter at the end to President Obama, in which these 6 former members are asking him for help, to get John help. I then put a cover letter on that and forwarded it to the president. Now, I had never sent a letter to the president before, so I'm telling you, if you ever do, even if it's on your professional letterhead, you tend to go through it looking for anything that anybody might see. Like, do eyes line up in a certain way on the page? Anything that might indicate a threat. Just makes you nervous, anyway. So, certainly no watermarks, So I sent that. I did not expect a response from the president. Again, all we're doing is just trying to throw as much as we can at them, at the government. Now, John's issues related to Rendlesham, issues with his sight, that was more or less immediately afterward. There was specific damage to his heart that was not realized until many years later, although I think it was just a few years later after the incident he would become aware that something had happened. What's important is, though, when he entered the Air Force, he had no heart problems at all. These were all significant. John will talk more about those. And of course, someone wanted it hidden, and some see it as critical evidence. John will also talk about that. Okay, so here's the basic problem. The VA, John had the medical problems, and the VA requests for disability and medical records were being denied, just summarily denied. Okay. His attempts were about as futile as mine were to get anything from the government through the FOIA requests. John Kyle, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, a senator from Arizona at the time, was the one who found out that his medical records were classified. Okay, now there's something interesting. Why would your medical records be classified? Well, if you're in the military and you're around things, possibly something, whatever you're involved in. But as we would be told later on by a man with the CIA, who we're going to go into, he was involved in something that involved rather the information that might be gleaned from his medical records could tell, let's say, a foreign adversary something important in their work to uncover what was going on. But John's civilian doctors had no access. Again, that was a big problem. So, you think that's enough, right? Well, to make things even worse, somebody wanted to get cute, okay? Now, at this point, I think they're getting tired of my FOIA requests. They're getting tired of us going on radio shows and appearing at conferences like this and saying, hey, John needs help, government's not doing anything. So what would any honest person or organization do but enter into the mix a fraudulent document, right? So John's DD-214, which is, anyone know what that means, has to do with your entry date and your release date from the military. Well, interesting enough, they show that John didn't enter the military until April of 1982. Now, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but December of 1980 precedes April of 82. So I'm not sure what John was doing in Rendlesham in an Air Force uniform if he wasn't actually in the Air Force. All right, this was almost just like throwing a softball up. Maybe that's what somebody intended. I don't know. So when we got that, well, Okay, we have just appeared now, remember, at the National Press Club in April of 2013. We're going through all this with the DD-214, the FOIA request. We're getting nowhere. And it's about a week and a half. It's about a week and a half after I returned from Washington. Okay. Cell phone rings. I'm in the carpool line at my son's elementary school. I didn't recognize the number. I answered. It turns out it's a fellow by the name of Dr. Christopher Green, CIA. Let me pull out of the carpool line for a moment. I might want to pay attention here, Okay. In about a 15, 20-minute call, he goes on to say that he became aware of our appearance at the press club and he thought he could help us. And I'm like, okay, well, why not? I'm already sending letters to the president and everything else. What's a meeting with the CIA guy? Well, not just a meeting, but like 36-hour later meeting. All right, so what is that? That's a motel. What is it, a Holiday Inn Express? I can't tell anymore. I think that's what it is. It's in Flowood, Mississippi. Okay? There's like a Lowe's and a Home Depot across the street. He wanted to meet there, like 36 hours later. Okay, that's only about 20 minutes from where I live, so I'm not going to complain about that. So we meet there like at noon on whatever day of the week it was, I don't remember. He rolls in and has his computer set up and goes to start showing me in the room scans of the brain and other medical related issues. Turns out he's a medical doctor. Okay, and this is all going pretty fast for me. I'm like, wait a minute, I just saw a TV show in 2008 and all of a sudden I'm in a motel near an airport, talking to a CIA agent. I mean, it's just weird, And okay, so he goes off about all that. Well, I may be somewhat of a country lawyer, but I'm not stupid. I already had people at the airport to watch for him, to communicate with me. So I would know when he got off the plane, when he got in the car, when he did it, whatever he did. I also had people outside the hotel. Well, I felt pretty good about myself, right? Real smart. Until the people I had outside the hotel said there was a high-tech surveillance car that had pulled in and seemed to be interested in what was going to be going on in the, I think I've hit buttons here, what was going on in the hotel. And it was pretty scary because once they were sending me pictures of that car bristling with apparatus from antennae to cameras and so forth, I thought, okay, that's interesting, but surely they're not here for us, They just go to let me get back to our motel. Surely they just go to a motel in Flowood, Mississippi all the time and just sit outside and scare people. But one of these people that was watching said, no, I think they're here for us because they were having a little league tournament nearby and a lot of families were staying there, and they said there was like a dad with his child went up to the car because it was such an interesting looking car, and said that as he approached the passenger window, he stopped and he went like this and started backing up. Okay, so here you go. You got a car, Gentech car, you can look that up, that I've never seen before, at a motel in Flowood, Mississippi, and I've got a CIA guy in the building. I wonder if they're connected. Of course they were. All right. Dr. Green wanted to meet John, and he wanted to do a physical examination of him and so on and so forth. So, okay, John and I are, of course, in daily contact. John at the time is living in Sedona. And by the way, if you've never done the pink Jeep tour in Sedona, I highly recommend it. We go to Sedona. Dr. Green sets us up in a hotel again, except this time it's a lot nicer than the Flowood Holiday Inn. It's like a Hilton resort, something similar to this. And he rents out, or he has a suite or something downstairs where we have lunch. And my wife, Lisa, goes with us. She's seated up front. She's an RN, also an attorney. Because he wanted to do some medical-related stuff, and I'm not anything but a layperson as it relates to medicine, I wanted to have her there to know if he was saying anything that was obviously not, not right. So he did a physical examination. He concurred that John didn't have long to live due to his heart. Okay. He then wants us to proceed to Flagstaff. And why not? We're already out in Sedona at this point. We've come from Flowood. It started in Washington. I saw a TV show in 2008. Okay, yeah, let's go to Flagstaff. So we went there to the Embassy Suites Hotel to meet Dr. Gary Nolan, who's a geneticist with Stanford University, or affiliated with at least. Dr. Colm Kelleher, who's written a book on Skinwalker Ranch. And of course, a phlebotomist. Who doesn't travel with a phlebotomist, at all times? Just in case you want to draw blood or do something, which is what they wanted to do with John. Okay. Dr. Green had indicated that he wanted John's DNA. So we set up a command post, if you will, at a Denny's not far away before we move in over there. Ultimately, John would come over after my wife and I talked to Doctors Kelleher and Nolan and let them know that there wasn't going to be any blood drawn that day. Okay. It was about that time that this is November of 13, I issued a news release summing up pretty much everything I've just told you about what's been going on. We've been trying FOIA requests. We're trying to get John's records. We're not getting anywhere. They're classified. He needs help, he needs help, he needs help, and he needs it now. Understand the environment that we're operating in at that time. This is the same time If you'll remember, the Veterans Administration was coming under a lot of fire for veterans who were dying on waiting lists to get surgeries and so forth. So it was just not the right time for the VA to have any kind of high-profile death on their hands, particularly one that was so well documented, where we've been trying to get him help. So I believe the news release, I hope it is reproduced in the symposium program. So I'm just going to go right through it here. Okay, that wasn't enough, though, meeting in Sedona. There had to be one more meeting because, you know, when you're on a government contract, what's spending money? So the next thing is these government guys, or in this case, Kit Green on the far left, wanted us to meet with Hal Puthoff on the far right. Hal's been associated with the CIA for many, many, many years in a variety of capacities. He's a physicist. So we are flown to Austin to meet with him. Again, my wife Lisa goes, and in this case, Linda Howe goes, not John. We spent 2 days, basically, from what we could understand, my wife and I, it was to find out what we wanted. What do we want for John? Oh, and I must mention, on the far left, you'll notice Kit Green's choice of shirt. Not exactly my style, but I'll say this much. I saw that shirt on that man at least a dozen times over 3 months or so. In a fashion rut, perhaps he is. Or was there another reason? Okay. Again, I just saw a TV show in 2008. I'm now in Austin at a CIA physicist lab. Okay. All right, so right about now, John McCain, who John had made contact with his staff, John McCain got the DD-214 corrected. So now John was back in the Air Force, as far as the Air Force is concerned, in '79, just in time for the event that occurred in the forest. Things are moving fast at this point. Remember, Dr. Green, the first official government person to step out of the shadows and approach us to want to not just only acknowledge that John needed help, but to try to offer that, okay? We are now 5 months, 6 months from the press club when we made our presentation there to this point. We're in Tucson for John's heart surgery, okay? Dr. Green had obviously done something just like Dr. Puthoff. In fact, Dr. Green issued a multi-page letter that detailed a lot of the problems and helped move this along. So I flew to Tucson in early December of 13 to be with John for his heart surgery, which he got. I was there when the cardiac surgeon came in to visit John at some point after the surgery. A Swedish man, if I remember right. He was, I asked him, I said, well, what caused it? He said, I don't know. His damage. John will talk some more about that. That'll become a little bit more important. All right, so Major General Gordon Williams. Major General Gordon Williams lived in Tucson. He has since passed. He came to our hotel. This is like the night before, John went to the Tucson VA for his surgery. John had invited him to come out. To this man's credit, he came over to have drinks with us that afternoon at the hotel bar. And prince of a fellow, I really liked him. I got to speak with him for 30 minutes or longer before John came down. And I asked him, what happened at Rendlesham? He just smiled at me and took a sip of his beer. I'm like, okay. You don't want to talk? Fine. So we made small talk. He did mention to me, however, that he had been invited by the Air Force to go to the Pima airfield. It's a boneyard, I believe, for space for aircraft, where they had a lot of B-52s. He said he had been invited to go over there the next day because they were going to be cutting one up for the Russian satellites to see them cutting. Apparently something they do to show that they're actually decommissioning, or rather, destroying aircraft. And I told him, gee, that sounds really neat, General. I said, do you think I could just ride with you over there? He said no. Okay. Okay, so we bump along for about another year. John is, recovering from the surgery. He's doing better, and better. He will see a variety of doctors through that period, some government, some not. And eventually, in January of 15, about a little over a year later, lo and behold, and there's a lot behind this too, but we don't have time to go into all the things that we went through. We got a lawyer in Phoenix along the way to help us with the VA disability applications and so forth, because that's not something I did every day, that's for sure. And so we got somebody who was familiar with that, who helped tremendously. Ultimately, the VA would admit that John was owed full disability. That's a big win, okay? Very big win. And not only that he was injured by an object of unknown origin in Rendlesham Forest. That's pretty big stuff, okay? So, fast forward, and of course, none of us knew it at the time, to today, with the Nimitz video and the government coming out with the Pentagon report, or as Nick would say, Pentagon. And it's interesting because, in a sense, John and I feel like we were there on that cutting edge. Not that we made that happen, but we were part of that beginning, and that's exciting to think about. And certainly when you consider I was in a t-shirt on a bed watching an episode of UFO Hunters in '08, and that's where it all started. So who would have thought that's where it would have ended? Or has it ended? That's where John's going to come in. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John. I took 35 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Pat. And a little bit louder applause, because he was a godsend, or I probably wouldn't be here today. Okay, starting off with, as Pat said, I've been involved in 2 books. This is the second one, Weaponization of Unidentified Air Phenomena. And what I'm going to do now is kind of go through my research. I started right after I really started getting sick, and some of the things that happened to me from that point all the way to today. Okay, the phenomenon, there's just some pictures here that show, it goes back to the time, prehistoric time. They've seen different things along the way. So when people say, it's all our technology we're seeing today, well, I don't know, were we flying around with this kind of stuff way back, hundreds of years ago? No, I don't think so. As Albert Einstein says, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. All right, I'm going to go into a report that played a big role in part of my settlement. It was the UK MOD report 552-0, known as the Condon report, okay? And in the report, I'm going to give you some highlights from it. It says the phenomenon occurs on a daily worldwide basis, that the UAP exists is indisputable, credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate, yada, yada, yada. So it goes into the details of the study that they've been working on inside the British government. Yeah. All right, come on. All right. One of the people that I've got to meet with on more than one occasion and talk to was Edgar Mitchell, and he made a quote. I happen to be privileged enough to be being on the fact that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real. What was interesting is that before he passed, I was able to talk to him for over an hour, and he told me that the phenomenon that we were dealing with is what they talked about in the Condon report, and that's what we dealt with in the forest, and that's the majority of what the government's aware of is and working with. And if I believe George Knapp, when he spoke on Saturday, talked about NIDS and stuff, he was involved in a lot of those programs. Okay. It's time to address the core issue of the phenomenon. There is a phenomenon no one officially wanted to talk about until now. Thus, society lived inside a false reality. It was time to admit it exists in the real world. Certain MOD documents are important. They have never been properly analyzed, which would be the Condon report. It's indisputable a phenomenon exists. This is the essential truth of Rendlesham. All my VA supports issues resolve around avoiding that fact. As a society, we are acting like a kid who pretends if he denies something, it does not exist. It's like the church refusing to look through Galileo's telescope for fear of what they would see. The 1% narrative, a vanishing small percent of the population holds a vast percentage of the material wealth. The 99% of the Occupy movement represents dissatisfaction with that equality. Conversely, a large percentage of the population understands we are not alone. A critical small percent of the society insists upon keeping that fact a secret. Disclosure is politically impossible. It is clear that the Pentagon has and had probably still has the greatest interest in concealing as best it can all the research which may cause the United States to hold a person of great superiority over terrestrial adversaries while giving it a considerable response capability against a possible threat from space. Within this concept, it is impossible for them to divulge the sources or conclusions of the research and the goals pursued because that could immediately point any possible rivals down the most beneficial avenues. Cover-ups and disinformation still remain under the hypothesis of an absolute necessity. Thus, it would appear that natural in the minds of the U.S. military leaders, secrecy must be manipulated as long as possible. Only increasing pressure from public opinion or a sudden rise in UFO manifestations might induce the U.S. leaders and persons of authority to change that issue. And that was the Cometa report. Confirmation trumps disclosure. There's an alternative paradigm to move forward. An event needs to be seen as a non-threatening means to maintain the orderly functioning of the political was admitting that we are not alone. That event is called confirmation. That event has already occurred. Now, there's two things that stand out about that. The actual British report, the MOD report, if you got it and read through it, it pretty much confirms it. And then also a few years ago, I don't have the exact date in front of me, Robert Bigelow went on and did an interview with George Knapp on his radio show on Coast to Coast, and he just flat out said that we need confirmation. We don't need disclosure. We're going to go forward with the idea that we're going to have to eventually admit something's going on, and we're going to stop right there. And that's basically, if you look at the real scenario that's gone and taken place, it kind of started that day when he introduced that did that interview with George Knapp that night, and moving forward, that's what's been taking place step by step as far as some of these videos being released and everything else. So what they've done now, and you have to give it credit to the stars and stuff, is they control the full narrative. Some may like that, some may not. Granted, they've got it in the public view more than ever. Granted, they've got the press talking about it. They've got Congress more interested. But is it right to have just one group of people control the narrative? That's for you to decide. But you also have to wonder what their agenda is, what their end game is also. Okay, now I'm not going to read this, but I'll give you a second to look through this. But these are different memos and different things that have come out over the years including the Twining Memo, General Stanford, the Cometa report, and the British MOD, Condign report. Okay, and the Condign report, again, the unidentified aerial phenomena exists is indisputable, credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate to exceptional velocities, and vanish. They can reportedly alter their direction of flight suddenly and clearly, can exhibit aerodynamic characteristics well beyond those of any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. So this report was done back in the early 2000s and released through FOIA. British researcher over there found out about a report that might have existed and forced the MOD to release this report. So this stuff is going on way back in the 2000s, way before ATIP and everything else was announced and the studies that they were going on. All right. Here's the big question. Have we reached a tipping point in the phenomenon and its public perception and how it has to be treated by various organizations, the media, and the politicians? Okay, as everyone mostly knows, a string of leaked videos has put the Defense Department and intelligence agencies in a position where they can no longer shrug off the reports of UFOs. And like I said, now the media is talking about it, which is good. You have some people stepping out of the shadows like Michio Kaku and all those that were real hesitant. They're starting to talk a little bit more. But guys, they knew about this. They just didn't want to step out on a limb. So again, that's a good thing, what they did as far as To the Stars. They did a good thing where they're getting people to take this more seriously and talk about it, okay? As you know, the Navy acknowledged that the videos were real, and that went back and forth. Somebody said it was, somebody said it wasn't. But ultimately, what choice did they have? These videos are out there, they're being shown on TV. They clearly show real footage. They have the pilots talking about it. They tracked the pilots down and confirmed it was going on. So there's been a big question of, did the Navy want this to happen? I don't know for sure, but I would say that there's a good chance that those videos ever surfaced, you still wouldn't be hearing about it today. Okay. And like I said, they confirmed, the reports, some of the things that were going on, and they could potentially pose a threat to national security after these videos drove home the fact that they had to say something. Can go ahead and read through that. As the summary is now, the Defense Department is having to come out and be more serious about it, including John Kirby. It's very seriously in the safety and security of our personnel and of our operations that remain paramount, the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby. So they got put in a bind. And again, like I said, I doubt very much they would have come forward with this without the pressure of To the Stars. Okay, the Defense Department Inspector General office is reviewing how the Pentagon has handled the issue of UFOs in its report and is also expected soon. Well, here's the thing. Okay, yesterday on the panel we talked a little bit about Lou, and now he's got Sheehan helping him go the IG involved. One of the things that Pat didn't talk about, but I'll bring up, when McCain got involved and they turned around and they had a DD Form 214 that they used to deny my disability because they said I wasn't in, and therefore my medical records didn't exist during that time. At one point in 2014, once we got enough proof that I really was in, they said, well, withdraw your appeal after they denied it, and they said, resubmit the DD Form 214 and we'll settle with you. So we did all that. We turned it in, and I remember telling Cheryl, I said, Cheryl, this is not going to work. And she gave me that, oh, come on, John, we're there now. And I said, wait. Sure enough, 2 months later, I got a letter from the VA saying, thank you for withdrawing your appeal. Your case is now closed. Serious as a heart attack. I mean, I opened it up, and right away, I'm on the phone with Cheryl. Okay, Cheryl, I'm about to scan and send you something. I told you so. And she flipped out. So immediately she started calling the senior aide in Phoenix with McCain. McCain was contacted, and we had a discussion, and the first thing we did was go to the IG. We wrote a formal complaint to the IG with everything. And McCain started making some phone calls, and he also made it clear through her and them that if this continues, he was going to consider opening hearings on Rendlesham. Because right then at that point, he knew something wasn't right, And we had all the documentation, fortunately, too, because it was sent through his office, so they couldn't really, they couldn't deny that they told us one thing and then they changed the tune. So, and there was some other stuff that had been going on. We had done FOIA. They wouldn't answer the FOIA. They did release some documents to McCain's, but they got caught. I think they had over 1,000 documents, and they only gave them like 200 of them. Now, we never did get the 800 other documents. We have the 200. So they were covering stuff up, okay, and they wouldn't cooperate, period. A little bit about Condyne again, the basic of confirmation, the report from 2000. You know, they used that report just like they did with some reports in the United States to say we're going to stop taking reports. There are key points in the documents that are important to all this. The senior staff didn't want it out, but this guy in the UK was really good at what he did, and he forced their hand. Okay, and the interesting thing was the report was discovered and released in 2006. And lo and behold, in this report, okay, which when I read through it, this was the first thing that stuck out. Okay, it talked about the phenomenon, the UAP exists, is indisputable, either man and unmanned, like I said. Okay, then it goes a little bit more into the performance emitted, which again kind of ties into what these pilots reported seeing. Okay, talks about travel, you know, and all that other things. Okay, talks about a field. Okay, and it goes into all this effect as far as the field effects of propulsion designs utilizing zero-point energy sources have the byproduct that the electron mass goes to zero, hence inertia will go to zero. Okay, it goes into radiation effects. Currently the field characteristics of a UAP are unknown, but it is corroborated fact that some sort of field is emitted and which advance effects on some of the people when they are close to the source, and several of us got close to the source. Okay, any pursuit of this process of identification or elimination of the EM radiation is pointless if the UAP radiation is other than the EM radiation as we know it. It is not certain that the radiation fields are conventional or electronic in nature. Okay, and then the proof of medical effects. The medical evidence is persuasive, but it does not prove conclusively that the magnetic fields exactly are the same type used in the Canadian experience. As far as UAPs always cause the more bizarre reports. Neither does it conclusively prove that all UAPs exhibit only magnetic fields. There may be others, including even fields of which there is no current knowledge. And when you get close to it, I'll quickly go through this. No attempt was made to consider the physiological and psychological aspects of what impinge on the topic of UAPs. It is clear, however, that such events only happen when a human is quite close to the phenomenon. In this respect, the most important finding in the potential connection between modulated magnetic fields would seem to produce the same effects on human mind as those experienced by those few witnesses who have been very close to a UAP, and that includes the people that went out in Rendlesham for us. Okay. Then time anomalies. In short, the witnesses often report gaps or lost time, often not accounting for up to several hours. Beyond current understanding, one of the extreme postulations is that these UAPs are in fact genuine constructed air vehicles which use potential scientific and engineering principles which are beyond current applied knowledge. Thus, they may have some sort of propulsion system which would provide the extraordinary range of velocities and accelerations frequently reported. It must therefore be recognized that methods of propulsion may in fact be possible beyond our current understanding in the UK. And then it goes into UAPs exhibit strategic interests. So it's important to the military to understand this. And then it goes into the charged buoyant bodies. They often occur when they are isolated electrically charged objects present, such as certain industrial and military buildings, which is what Robert Salles talked about by nuclear weapons and different types of military hardware and stuff that are in the air that they may be showing interest. others nations' interest. There is no formal intelligence exchange on the topic, however. Was redacted there. It says, are known to have at least one member of staff active in this area. And I've always wondered that this part of the report that was redacted, because quite a bit of it was were they referring to the United States as far as that they were studying this, which then later now ATIP, and there was other supposedly things, they were studying this even earlier than ATIP. So, you know, that both the Russians and the Chinese are trying to understand this also. The Russians were well ahead of the Chinese, and at one point early on, in the early 80s, they were ahead of us. And there was a guy by the name of Colonel Bearden that recognized that and started pushing this to the government that we needed to start making some changes. And that included then when Hal Puthoff came in and started running the Stargate program and some of this other stuff. So for quite a while, it was felt the Russians were way ahead of us and the United States had to play catch up. I don't know today where both nations stand, but I would have to say based on where we are technology-wise, we've mastered it a lot better than the Russians have. This is something the Chinese had to say about it, and what they said was, and there's a short embarrassed silence, and he said that China will be a quick second after the United States makes the announcement to the world about what we know. So all these major nations are keeping everything close to the vest on what they know and what they're doing with it. A little bit about Jacques Vallée, I'll just let you scan through it real fast. So he did a study of it, and he proposed a 6-layer approach to analyzing UAPs. These were, and I'll slowly go through them as far as letting you read it, how he analyzed a UAP. Then the physical effects on people. The anti-physical effects. I'm running through these quickly because the time's getting short, so you just, take a quick look. But as you can see that Jacques Vallée and other people inside government have been studying the phenomenon. And if you go through these different effects and stuff, and it's in your program too, you'll see a lot of what they've talked about, different people's experience and had happened, including quite a bit of it is what different people experienced in Rendlesham. Okay. Now we're getting into the Eric Davis and Vallée about, using this as far as the product of technology that integrates physical and phenomena and primarily affects cultural variables and stuff like that. So we're moving towards the advancements in technology. Breaking that down, the phenomena is the product of a technology. The technology triggers effects. They can manipulate cultures. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about, Nick talked about it, then George, I believe, talked about it. But what was interesting too was after I got my settlement and Senator McCain was in the middle of it, which came out, which I wasn't aware of, but there were 38 papers that were submitted and declassified by the DIA. And what I mean by declassified, I have no idea what they were given, but the portion of it was declassified that was made public was there were 38 different papers on all the exotic technology they're studying and working on. And one of those papers was done by Hal Puthoff, okay? And it has to do with the metric tensor propulsion theory, which is kind of short for saying Star Trek, like warp drive. Okay, so within those 38 papers, if you hadn't ever looked at them, they're very interesting on what our scientists and our technology community is looking at for the future of the United States military and for us, period. And the interesting thing was, after McCain, and what I've always wondered, because Green said he was contacted to get a hold of us right away and start helping us. Ultimately, when we announced it, we said that McCain was working with us. Right away after we got our settlement, they went to McCain's committee with these papers and for funding for new technology projects. Now, this came back from the Condon report, highlighted areas of it as important. It says, as an individual having spent time within a temporal modified field would return to normal environment, find that more time has passed and could be counted for. So let me keep going because we're running out of time. Blue shifting of EM and energy spectrum. Now, this is something that came out. I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but this is important involving all of this and what we were probably exposed to. Terahertz radiation. Back when we first met Green, he started talking about this. At that point in time, very little had ever been said about terahertz radiation, but now it's becoming mainstream as far as what's happening could be involved is the terahertz radiation. And it's definitely becoming medical communities looking at it. It is known to damage DNA. It is all, stimulates DNA repair activities. And here's a key, my heart, according to Green, was damaged by terahertz radiation. When I talked to Chuck DeCaro of CNN, and then he ended up working for the government with a guy by the name of Andy Marshall, was the top think tank in the military for years, to include the fact that he was involved with the Russian doctrine. When I told him, and I discussed with him, because he had a clearance a little bit about what Dr. Green told us and gave to the DOD and the VA, he said, when I described terahertz radiation, the former CIA, Chuck DeCaro, made the following statements. This would account for how Peniston could have received the binary transmission. This would all account for DNA damage. Now, Hal Puthoff, he plays a major role in all of this, and if you notice, he was in To the Stars, and then he also ended up kind of splitting away from To the Stars. I don't know how many people you know, but they did get a DoD contract, and him and I believe, and I can't say for sure that that Justice is involved directly, but Hal did get a contract. He's working with the Army on some technology, and Justice may play a part in this. I'm gonna have to go through this really quick. Now, in the Condon report that no one caught, and I didn't get the report until after 2010. Nobody in the UFO community caught it. There was only one little brief discussion about it in 2006, which happened to be with a guy who works for the MI6 in England, who's tied into Green and all these. In the report, it says the well-reported Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods. It is clear that the recipients of this effect are not aware of their behavior perception of what they are observing is being modified. So, in essence, what they're saying is that some people have speculated, and I believe the colonel's going to talk about this later, that he feels a lot of some of the problems we're having, people that were involved remembering stories are different, had more to do with the interrogation by the OSI, which, by the way, I can say this, people have said it's taken place. Peniston, under hypnosis, said it happened to him, and they used sodium pentothal on him. I have no recollection of ever being interrogated by OSI that way or anything else. The one thing I remember clearly was when I went into the office, met with the colonel, then met with the base commander and the wing commander. Peniston did all the talking after the thing, handed my statement in, which got released by Colonel Hall years later, just simply describing what we saw. Peniston's the one that said it was a triangular craft and everything else. All I remember seeing clearly was lights and different colored lights and things that went on and the movement of them. I never saw a triangular craft, never claimed to have seen a triangular craft. I never touched it or anything else. But I will say this, both Peniston on night one said I disappeared into the craft, he called it. And on night 3, Adrian Mustensa, who was with me when we went forward to Colonel Hart's party, stated the object came over the top of me and I disappeared. So people ask me where did my injuries probably occur? Probably either night 1 or night 3 or both of it, because I had some kind of interaction with this phenomenon that was there in the forest. The other thing is that when Pat talked about my heart condition, what happened was immediately afterwards, so this happened in December, I started getting sick. And I PCS from the base, and in July I got really sick again. And I was home on my days off, and I was so sick I couldn't go back to the base, so I had to go to the emergency room to be cleared by the Air Force that I couldn't return that next morning, so to be there. So when I saw the doctor, he starts listening to my chest, and he looks at me and says, "What's the Air Force say about your heart murmur?" Now this would have been in July of 81. I looked at him and said, "I don't have a heart murmur." "Well, yes you do," and stuff. So he brought in his whole staff to listen to it, and it was very distinctive. And so that, like, people have tried to speculate, well, maybe I had this before I came in and stuff. No, this was very easily distinguished by the ER doctor who found it first. But not only that, you could not come in the Air Force with a heart murmur. And the fact is, I do have a record showing I came in the Air Force with a clean bill of health, and I got out in 1988 of active duty with the heart problems. So there's more than enough records to support the heart injury took place between 79 and 88. And the other interesting, which I didn't know anything about at the time, but I found out years later, was they immediately, when I went back to the base, they took me and sent me to Wright-Patterson, where they did a full evaluation of my heart and all these tests. And I didn't know what Wright-Patterson's status was and all this stuff, but I do now. And that is one of the things that happened where my civilian doctors wanted to see the initial testing done on my heart, what started my issues. And that was where the DOD and the VA and everybody else said, no, you're not going to have access to any of this. To include, to this day, I don't have any access to my medical records. Most of my stuff can be handled if people know the VA and the community and the care now, but I have to go in next week to have my heart reevaluated again at a VA facility, overseen by my cardiologist that's there and the chief of cardiology of Indianapolis. So whatever happened to my heart, all this stuff that went on, it's something that the military has great interest in and they want to keep locked down. Almost out of time, so sorry, I'm just going to have to go through some stuff because I want to add some of the stuff that was in the Rendlesham area at the time of our event. Okay, let me go back to this. Dr. Christopher Green, okay. Once we got everything taken care of, and they had made it sound like, and am I wrong to say this, Pat, that this was all just going to go away? They weren't going to say anything about it. They helped us. They were glad. They may have a couple questions down the road. Then all of a sudden, a few months later, Dr. Christopher Green goes on, and you might want to read through this, and in your program, he went on above top secret and laid out exactly what happened to me. What his involvement was, why the DOD was covering it up, and everything else. He laid it, what caused my injuries, what went on, and everything else. Okay? Now, the last part is what was in the area at Rendlesham at the time. There was a guy studying it through funding through the British government, through the university. His name was Andrew Pike. He wrote a book on it, and he was down in the area actually studying the phenomenon in the area and plasmas and everything else. Okay, there's some history on, you know, what was seen over the years as far as Borroughs, plasmas and everything else. Here's a little bit laying out, you know, the phenomenon and everything else, what was seen back in time, Norway and areas. In 1998, it was realized that, you know, state within a plasma can be excited by mid-air infrared radiation. At Rendlesham, during this time frame, the original radar was there. It was modified. It was being used to put EM frequencies into the forest, through the lighthouse, through that. They had tunnels underground that they were doing work with, that they were studying the phenomenon and you know, as far as provoking it. That was all taking place why the incident took place. That's the original lighthouse. I'm sorry I have to go through fast, so I got about 2 minutes. Okay, now we go into DNA. There was a high interest by, like Kit said, by Dr. Green in my DNA and the study of military personnel involved, to include me. Then it goes a little bit into the weapons and how they could use it in mind control, which, by the way, John Alexander was working on. Okay? And then it shows a little bit more about plasmas, how it can be manipulated, both man-made and the real phenomenon. And then, sorry, we had to go through this in a hurry, but all this is covered in a lot more in the book, Weaponizations of an Identified Phenomenon 40 Years Later. It's available on Amazon. Thank you. Do we have time for a couple questions? They said we do have a mic back there, but yeah. Too much. I had too much data. Couldn't cover it. Oh, we do have 15 minutes? I thought it was supposed to end at 10:15, so. Yeah, we can take some questions if you'd like to ask them. All right.
Dennis.
Here we go. We got
Dennis, a shot.
I want to commend you on your heroism and all that you sacrificed for your country. It's amazing.
Thank you.
My husband is a disability attorney and a federal judge for disability, and I know how painstaking it is for people who are just citizens to get their due share of what's coming to them. When you left the military, was there any recognition at all that you had been injured or suffered damages?
Yeah, when I came in '79, one of the few things they didn't expunge from my records, because when Kyle went for them, first they said my records weren't available, then they gave him a brief amount of records. Everything from Rendlesham, Bentwaters was not in there, but they showed my entry physical, which showed everything clean. Then in '88, it showed my exit physical from active duty, showing all the heart damage and everything else. So yes, it was acknowledged by the military that I was injured while I was in the military.
Were you compensated for that?
Not at that point, no. It wasn't until 2010 when I got really sick and no one would cooperate that we pursued the disability and everything else.
And I think that's pathetic. You were over there serving your country, and you encountered something phenomenal. One of the things that I've seen about Rendlesham is that there was some kind of marking on the craft itself. Did you see that? It looks sort of like hieroglyphics.
Yeah, no, I did not. The only thing
Okay.
I saw was lights. Sergeant Pennison was the one that said he got close to it, walked around and saw the glyphs and touched the craft.
Well, I want to thank you both. I'm sorry you had to go through all this, but talk about serving your country. You gave them, literally, you gave them your heart.
That's true, thank you.
So thank you for being
Thank
here.
you very much. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
hi. My question is any of these kinds of things still going on at Rendlesham in Great Britain? Is there anything going on now?
There's a group of people that go down there all the time, and yes, there's been stuff going on. In fact, when we were back in 2010, we brought a guy down, an engineer down with equipment, and while we were there, he got some stuff on film and stuff of what was in the area and what was going on through infrared cameras and stuff. And if you wanted to reference it, it'll be in our archives. With Linda Moulton Howell wrote a complete report on all that, what was taking place and what was going on. And yes, over the years, they've continued to have stuff take place down there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Such an honor to talk to you today. The incident in Rendlesham being the biggest, UFO incident, I think, in history. But my question is, did you mention that the craft passed over you and you disappeared, or somebody disappeared? What I caught.
Well, what I was told by Pennison was it came over the top of me, and I was frozen and gone for a while. Adrian Prestinza on the third night said, as we were approaching whatever it was, it came over, he got knocked to the ground, and it barely touched his hand, and I went into it, and he saw me phase out and disappear. Now, what's interesting, which is in the book, which Adrian never talked about, I was able to get Adrian Prestinza, because of his injuries he received there at the same time. He now also has full compensation from the VA, is being treated for his injuries from the incident.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, John. For those of us who are interested in some of the things that have happened to you after the event, and thank you for sharing with us today, but I know you had to go through some of those later slides really quick. Can you please expound on a little bit the interest that some folks have had in your DNA after these events have occurred, as much as you're willing to share and we have time for?
Well, we don't have enough time to go through all that. Okay, it really is, and it never ends. They continuously are doing more and more stuff. What I can tell you is this, okay, if you listen to George Knapp, they talked about how at one point a special operations team was brought into Skinwalker Ranch. They had an encounter with something. Now, some of them were injured by it. The team was taken out, and two things happened that was interesting. Number one, they had some injuries, and number two, whatever it was, that Skinwalker showed up where they lived. Okay, now, the interesting thing is that Hal Putoff and Green, what they told us was simply this: there are a lot more incidents that have never been made public. Rendlesham slipped through the cracks, it shouldn't have. So mine's a public case, which means they could go public with stuff, but there was over 100 people that have had direct encounters with this phenomenon that were tested, were put in a program to test. We can only guess based on what Nolan and Green and Putoff told us, was they're looking for some genos and some different things on how it would have affected us, why it affected us, were we injured by it prior to, or was it attracted to us because of our genetics and our DNA and our genos and stuff like that. There was, let's just say this, we were told none of this would ever be made public. Now he went public with the Above Top Secret, then Danny Jacobson's did a book and they talked about the DNA program stuff, but there's so much more to this. They visited me since, they brought me down to Austin, they're still evaluating my DNA and everything else. So Well, yes, but I'm not trying to sidestep. I'm not an expert on this DNA stuff. I can only tell you what they've told me and what they've said, but there's a definite interest in people that have had encounters with the phenomenon and what happens to their DNA. And also they wanted to do an MRI on the brain because there's stuff they said in the brain that can contribute to all of this too. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, MUFON. Yeah.
I don't know if this mic is on. There we are. John Borroughs and Patrick Fresconga. That was wonderful. John, I think you should do, both of you guys,